to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Monday, March 2nd, 2015. March is coming in like a lion, actually more like a polar bear. We're talking about that a little bit later in the show. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room sorting out all of our technical issues, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A couple of program notes before we get going. This coming Wednesday, March 4th, we're going to have the filmmakers behind this amazing documentary called Trace Amounts. And it's talking about contaminants in vaccines, which even in microscopic amounts are causing health problems. It's a documentary that the big pharmaceutical companies and CDC are trying to make you ignore. But we're going to have the filmmakers on our show talking about the film and what it reveals here. Also, before we get into the news here, one of our supporters of WhatReallyHappened.com sent us a whole box of these 2-disc special editions of V for Vendetta. And if you don't have a copy of this, what we're going to do is this one I'm holding right here in front of the BAM user camera is going to go to this week's top donor at WhatReallyHappened.com. So got a little bit of a prize out there for those of you who have not seen the movie. And if you haven't, shame on you. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie here. All right, getting on to the news. Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, is in Washington, D.C. He is making the rounds, trying to remind the U.S. government that he is in charge of this nation, and not the people, not the Congress, not the president. He made a speech in front of AIPAC earlier today, where his main talking points are that, yes, he does speak for all the world's Jewish people, a claim that even Dianne Feinstein is saying, no, you don't. And Netanyahu's second point was all about how the U.S.-Israel alliance is strong and unbreakable, despite recent evidence to the contrary. And these are, this is the agenda. Basically, Netanyahu said to AIPAC, this is your agenda. Our alliance is strong. We represent all the world's Jewish people. Go forth and do likewise, as it were. All right, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You know, if they usually got to say it, that means it's the opposite.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's there to try and repair the political damage that his grandstanding has done. And, of course, a big part of Israel's political cover around the world is the claim that they are the Jewish state and represent what's best on planet Earth for all the world's Jewish people. And more Jewish people are starting to realize it is the behavior of Israel's government that presents the greatest danger to them, because Israel uses them as a political shield.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to talk about the first freight train servicing linking a Chinese province to Russia.
Yes.
And it's with oil exploration. And this just goes back to what we've been saying. They're doing deals, and, you know, and we're just creating wars and destabilization programs. And the reason we're destabilizing is because we know we can't do these kind of deals anymore. You know, like we're stuck in this debt-based economy, and they're expanding. You know,
absolutely.
And I also want to talk about the assassination. Some people are saying, you know, he had a lot of enemies in Russia. It could be the nationalists, this or that. No, it had to be the CIA just because at the timing. The timing says everything. And otherwise, you see all the commentators saying Putin did it. It's like everything that something happens, it's Putin to blame. Right there, that tells you, you know.
What we're looking at is a classic destabilization pattern, either riots, protests, murders, or something blamed on the government that is to be replaced, and they're already tipping their hand here. I'm looking at this article over at Activist Post. Is the Nemtsov murder the first shot fired in the Russian Spring? And we know the U.S. has been trying to find a way to destabilize the Putin government. Russia kicked out U.S. aid when it was discovered they were funding the opposition groups here. And at this point, though, this is not getting any traction, blaming this on Putin, probably because they blamed Flight 17 on Putin. They tried to blame Flight 370 on Putin. And they've gone to that particular well one too many times. They've cried, Putin wolf, Putin wolf, Putin wolf, where everybody's just tuning them out here. And what we're seeing here is everybody's trying to figure out who really did the killing, and Putin is like on the bottom of the list. And it really does make a lot of sense, because the strongest reason to doubt that Putin had anything to do with the assassination of Nemtsov is the manner in which it was done, a shooting done out in public near the Kremlin. Circumstances clearly intended to generate the maximum publicity. Now, here in the United States, the government gets rid of its enemies in small plane crashes, single-car accidents, or staged suicides. Putin... Or heart attacks. Putin, being former KGB, is just as knowledgeable about such sophisticated means of covering a murderer's tracks. Had Putin wanted Nemtsov dead, we would have heard that Nemtsov suddenly became very, very depressed over his plunging political fortunes and decided to kill himself. This assassination was carried out in a way to generate publicity in order to put the blame on Putin to destabilize Russia. It's a repeat of what we saw a year ago in Kiev, where they had these snipers firing on both sides trying to fan up the violence. It was blamed on Yanukovych to drive him from office. This Nemtsov killing has Maidan in the USA stamped all over this thing.
And you can't stabilize a country that has the president has an 85% approval rating. It's just not going to happen.
That's exactly it here. And here's something else to consider. Right now, Nemtsov was sort of fading out of politics. He'd gone back into business. He had a 4% support rate. Now, Putin and indeed the Russian government's policy has been to distance themselves from the Soviet Union as much as possible in terms of policies and practices. Putin, of course, is seen by the world as having tamped down the U.S. aggression in Syria, trying to get the situation in Ukraine under control. He is seen as a global emerging statesman. He is much admired around the world. As you say, he's got 85% support in his own country. He's not going to throw that all away to whack a guy with 4% support in the polls. And even Nemtsov's own political party has issued a statement saying they don't think Putin had anything to do with this. This was all about stirring up some kind of a conflict to destabilize Russia, to drive Putin from power here. Former Russian president, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev is out there saying exactly the same thing. This is clearly a false flag to destabilize the Russian government. Paul Craig Roberts agrees with that. This was
I just want to say also, Russia's got 50 new ships coming into service this year. Some are fixed up and added new components on, like new hardware, and they got new planes coming into service this year. So the CIA and U.S. government and England has ran out of time, basically.
Well, let's face it, Russia, and for that matter, Iran and everybody else, they know the U.S. is coming for them. They would be fools not to be preparing to deal with that. The New World War is on the doorstep. We know it's being brought to us by the U.S. government, NATO, the bankers, and everybody knows it's coming, and they're doing their best to get prepared for it. But you're absolutely right, because this plan to conquer the Mideast oil regions was supposed to end in 2008. Now it's 2015. All the other targets for the U.S. aggression, the war for Bretton Woods, the war for the petrodollar, they've now had years to prepare themselves. And that's another reason why I don't want to see this war move any further along, because the U.S. is going to lose it. And there will be nukes somewhere along the way. And to the bankers who start these wars for their personal profit, they don't care who wins or loses. If the U.S. loses, we'll just stick them with more of the debt. That's the attitude from the bankers. Okay?
Well, like you said, at the end of World War II, it ended with nukes. The next war will start and probably end with nuclear weapons, if there's anybody left.
If there's any, we'll make the rubble bounce. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. I know we got another caller waiting on the line, and we're going to get to you just as soon as we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and the phone lines are loading up here. Before I go back to the phones here, I just want to skip back to this whole Netanyahu situation. There are protests at the convention center in Washington, D.C. against Netanyahu and against AIPAC, not getting a lot of coverage here in the American media. Gee, I wonder why. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I might have a big but for you. There are certain issues about which I would disagree with you vehemently, but on certain issues, notably fiat currency and privatized central banking, your all wars or bankers' wars, and your take on the Israel-Iran NNPT, the nuclear non-proliferation treaty thing. I think you are quite possibly the most articulate and best presenter on these issues in talk radio, because you make the issues exceedingly clear. You keep bringing the salient points like when people aren't talking about them. And this ties into Netanyahu's visit. I have, with all this stuff going on about Iran, I never hear anyone but you mention the fact that Iran is a signature of the NNPT, and as such, they are entitled to things such as assistance with power generation and things like that. They've gone about, they've been transparent. They've allowed IAEA inspections. And here we have Israel, which acquired its seed stock illicitly from the U.S. It didn't allow inspections of Dimona. It maintains the policy of nuclear ambiguity, and it will not sign the NNPT. And I don't hear anybody talking about this stuff.
Well, certainly not in the corporate media. You're not going to hear that because,
Even on talk radio, I don't hear AJ or any other big guys talking about it.
Well, maybe that's how they got to be big guys. I mean, we're looking at people like Brian Williams and Bill O'Reilly. These are guys pulling down multi-million-dollar salaries, and they're confirmed liars, and you have to come to the conclusion that's what they're paid to do. They're getting the big bucks for being convincing tellers of falsehoods.
Dimona's out there leaking radiation into the Negev, and nobody, and we never hear anything about this. They've been lead developers in neutron nukes and CAC nukes and all this sort of thing. And, it's just amazing to me that no one will hold that's what the NNPT is for, to set standards and terms and hold people responsible. But nobody will hold Israel responsible for their behavior relative to nuclear power and nuclear weapons.
Well, Israel's been using the NNPT to guarantee itself a market monopoly for clandestine nuclear weapons. And that way they can charge whatever they want. We know from documents found from the previous government of South Africa that Israel was discussing sales of clandestine nuclear warheads to the former government of South Africa. There are indications that North Korea may have actually bought their bombs from Israel rather than develop them themselves. But as long as the rest of the nations, the nuclear nations, have signed the NNPT, they're not market competition for Israel. So Israel can charge whatever price they want for their nuclear weapons. Charge whatever the market will bear. And you're absolutely right. It is a hypocrisy. Don't forget, in this run-up to Netanyahu coming to the United States, the U.S. government itself declassified documents confirming that the United States was helping Israel develop an H-bomb. Years ago. That should have been headline news all over the corporate media and all over talk radio, but it's not getting any mention whatsoever. Because everybody who's been towing the line about, we don't know if Israel probably doesn't have nukes and the rest of it, they don't want to be embarrassed by that. And it's even an embarrassment for President Obama. If you remember that first press conference he had as President of the United States of America, Helen Thomas asked him directly, what nations in the Middle East have nuclear weapons right now? And Obama danced away from it and said, well, we view nuclear proliferation as a very serious crisis, and we're keeping an eye, and didn't answer the question. 24 hours later, Helen Thomas was banished from the White House press corps.
Right. And ain't ambiguity wonderful? We have these allegations. Iran can't win also. When you open yourself up for inspection, and then people turn around and allege that you still have something secret, some further, deeper, secretive, super duper secret underground base that they're not showing the IAEA, while Israel is totally refusing, has always refused inspections of Dimona, how can Iran possibly win when no matter what they do, fresh allegations are made that they have something that they've hidden. It's like having the police, search your house with a subpoena, and they're still saying, the drug-sniffing dogs are gone, and then somebody says, but he had it hidden someplace sacreder, you know. It's no win, no matter how transparent you try to be.
Yeah, it's basically putting the burden of proving a negative onto your intended target. And anybody who's a student of logic understands you cannot prove a negative. You can only prove a positive,
right,
which is a founding principle of our supposed legal system in the United States, that the burden of proof is on the government to prove guilt. We're not trying to return to Code Napoleonic where the government just says you're guilty and it's up to you to prove that you're innocent, because that is an impossible claim and it led to hideous abuses of the justice systems of many countries, and it's now unfortunately starting to become the norm here in the United States.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, well, they have to respond to every unreasonable suspicion or improbable cause. Anyway, all right, thanks.
All right, you got it. One of the reasons that Iran has balked at some of the IAEA demands for inspection. The IAEA is supposed to inspect no nuclear sites here, and the IAEA is trying to get inspections of military sites unconnected with weapons development. Find out what... It's not a license to spy. And we saw this in Iraq, when Iraq was open to inspections about the claims they had nuclear weapons, and none were ever found, and then Iraq came back and said, these people are spying on our military development and reporting what they find to these foreign governments. And that is not what they're supposed to be doing here. All right, real quick, we are going to go to Mo in Florida. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, thanks again for the forum. I just... say that you trained me well. This Nementov guy, this Putin critic, Kremlin critic that was shot, look for what's there and is not. Look what should be there and isn't. And that's, they're saying he had proof that on Putin that he knew he started this, was behind this revolution in Ukraine and moving military equipment and this and that. Well, obviously, if that was the case, that stuff would be out already. Then this is the reason they gave a lot of... That came
out of the British press there, the idea that Putin had to whack Nemtsov because Nemtsov had proof of Russian weapons inside Ukraine, but gosh, gee, now he's been assassinated and we can't show you that proof, but take our word for it. That's what Nemtsov was saying. And it's not supported by his own close associates. In his own party. Even his own party is saying, this wasn't Putin. This is destabilization at work. Mo, I gotta let you go. We gotta take a break for commercials. Back with another phone call, after these commercials. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phones here real quick, to set the context of what we're going to be talking about regarding Netanyahu and his upcoming speech tomorrow, along with the declassification of the U.S. document confirming that the U.S. was helping Israel develop hydrogen bombs, we have the leaked memo from Mossad, which indicates that at the same time Netanyahu was up at the United Nations with his cute little cartoon bomb, Mossad was telling Netanyahu, we do not see any indications of nuclear weapon development. He lied, he lied, he lied, he lied. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Keith in Montana, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, actually two different things. The same thing with this thing with Israel. What you ran on your site yesterday, which one of maybe your warriors posted there about the funds for Israel's new Iron Dome system, which kind of shocks me because if you look at it, the amount requested on that equals, under the Standard of Living Index, almost 40,000 jobs for a full year for an American or Americans. And then it says that that's requested in addition to the 158 million. So you can double that. That'd be 80,000 jobs for a full year at the Standard of Living Index,
I think the added amount requested was something like $317 million. But here's the real irony. The United States taxpayer, meaning you, are being forced to pay for the research and development of Israel's Iron Dome system. Israel then turns that around and sells that for profit to other countries. And they get to keep the profit. And we, the American taxpayer, get nothing except another handout saying, what have you done for us today?
Yeah, that's what got me out of how they were selling that Iron Dome. And then also the other one with the Iron Beam system, which is a laser one. And they're selling it. They're reported sale to Singapore and everything. And, of course, this is all co-developed with the United States and like that. But Israel's reaping in the profits like that, and the American taxpayers aren't getting nothing out of it. And thousands of Americans are employed, starving, jobless, homeless. and our veterans are committing suicide 22 a day like that, and what's the American people get?
They get the bill for all of this, and I want to get on back to AIPAC here and a couple of stories that may illustrate just how badly the U.S. government is now controlled by Israel. So, Keith, thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. I want to get through these stories here. Okay, over at AIPAC, this is being reported in aljaminer.com. U.S. Senator announces new legislation to fight the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement here in the United States of America. This is coming from U.S. Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat of Maryland, is going to introduce a bill to combat the anti-Israel boycott. He just said that in his speech at AIPAC. Now, boycotts are a recognized form of peaceful protest protected by the First Amendment. And this supposed United States senator is so in love with Israel that he wants to suspend the First Amendment. And we're getting that also in terms of rumors that part of the new FCC control of the Internet will be to tamp down on anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel, because all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. That's like saying all criticism of Adolf Hitler is anti-German, just to show you how ridiculous that whole idea is. Senator Lindsey Graham kicked off his AIPAC speech by promising to cut funding to the United Nations to stop them from just taking such a strict line with Israel. John Kerry went one step further and declared the United Nations Human Rights Council is just obsessed with Israel. Why are you so obsessed with? Go look someplace else for human rights violations. Now, here's a story that came out of Sputnik News. Let's see. U.S. Senator John Barrasso issued a statement basically questioning Obama's loyalty to Tel Aviv. Does he truly support Tel Aviv? Well, I have a message to Senator Barrasso. President Obama's job is to support the people of the United States, not a foreign government. Remember Washington's farewell address. Avoid foreign entanglements. Obama is listening to George Washington's advice. His job is this country and these people. And for that matter, so is Senator Barrasso's job. But, Senator, if you really feel that your true mission in life is to support Tel Aviv, I invite you and all the other Israel firsters in Congress to immediately get on an airplane and move to Israel permanently. I'm sure they'll be able to find room for you in all those illegal settlements out there in the West Bank. No government can serve two masters. And a government that serves Israel does not, cannot, and will not serve the American people. A friend of Israel is no friend of America. And in these dark times, America needs leaders who will put America first, second, and third. And while President Obama and I disagree on many things, I am appalled at the American corporate media lambasting him for daring to defy Netanyahu and Israel, and he's obviously not committed to Israel. Well, he's supposed to be committed to this country. And I'm having a real problem with all these articles out there listing these members of Congress who are not planning on showing up tomorrow and trying to describe them in terms of ignoring Israel's safety. Israel is a nuclear-armed nation. They've got hydrogen bombs. That recently declassified United States document proves that. Israel is not in facing existential threat. They are the existential threat to everybody around them. Alrighty, getting on back to the situation over in Russia and this very public, obvious PR-generating assassination of Boris Nemtsov. They're already out there saying, thousands march in Russia, and they're out there with photographs and signs, and this is a horrible thing, we will not forget. This is exactly a replay of every other U.S. covert regime change over the last 60 years. This has Maidan in the USA stamped all over it. Even over at Activist Post, is this the beginning of the Russian spring? We will free Russia from the evil Vladimir Putin and make sure that they come back into the fold of a U.S. dollar-dominated world. Very few people are buying this one here. Investment Watch blog, Putin foe killed by Western intelligence. Another story over, this is a YouTube video. Did the CIA assassinate Boris Nemtsov to blame Putin? Another story over at Henders on Left Hook. Nemtsov and the end of the British Empire. Talking about the desperate actions that we're seeing coming out of the U.S. and NATO to try and get a third world war going before the economies fall apart are now calling attention to themselves. Now, over in Ukraine, we're getting some very alarming news from Donetsk. Their intelligence services are saying that Kiev, which had withdrawn its heavy weapons in accord with the Minsk agreement, has now turned those weapons around and are massing them along the contact line. And this may have been either Poroshenko got a phone call, get this thing going, or Poroshenko's plan was to pull his weapons back, wait for the Eastern Ukrainian republics to pull their weapons back, then go on in for a blitzkrieg across the eastern Ukraine. Story out of wakeupfromyourslumber.com. It's now being confirmed by the Kiev government. Ukrainian farmlands are being transferred to the ownership of the 1% and genetic modified seed companies. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the situation in Ukraine. Now, last week, Great Britain announced that they were going to send trainers into Ukraine. They're not combat troops, they're trainers, they're advisors. And we don't know what to dodge that is. We're now hearing that NATO isn't actually on board with that idea right now. May not actually happen. So apparently to keep this thing going, and this is being reported over in Sputnik News, U.S. plans to send 300 military personnel to train the Ukrainian soldiers on their soon-to-be-delivered U.S.-manufactured weapons. And it may even be worse than that, because we could see a new Gulf of Tonkin. Have the trainers in a camp someplace, send in a drone strike to blow them all up in a very bloody, visible manner, and then blame it on Russia. Russia attacked and killed our people. Oh, the horror. Oh, the horror. They are desperate to get a major world war going to distract from the crimes of private central banking. Now, a story we're also getting from Sputnik News, Washington is apparently going to use private contractors to deliver weapons into Ukraine, hoping nobody will notice. There's no official sending of U.S. weapons to Ukraine, but according to a hacker group in Ukraine that has penetrated the communications of the junta in Kiev, Washington is going to use Western private military contractors. And once the weapons are delivered, these companies will send their, you'll pardon the expression, volunteers to help Ukraine use these weapons. In other words, we're talking mercenaries. We're talking potentially Blackwater, Sea Academy, whatever they're calling themselves this week. And all of this warmongering is having its desired effect because apparently, according to TASS, Russia's NATO envoy, Alexander Grushko, is saying Russia will take all measures against a possible NATO threat in Ukraine, and they're not ruling out a military response. Well, Alexander, that's exactly what the U.S. was hoping you were going to say. Meanwhile, NATO is running around all of its member nations who are very reluctant during these hard economic times to spend any more money on weapons, and it's wagging the Russian threat. You must spend more to buy us more weapons because the Russian threat is out there. Apparently they're wagging their finger at Great Britain, which tacitly has a commitment to spend 2% of its gross domestic product on NATO, but doesn't seem to be in a rush to actually do it. They're bringing back the Cold War. My parents' generation was looted of their money in a constant state of preparation against the evil Soviet Union. And then the Soviet Union went away, and now they had to make the Russia the new Soviet Union, so they can go back to the same scam. Oh, the Russians are going to get you unless you give us more money for weapons. I know you need roads and schools and hospitals and stuff, but really we've got to prioritize. and build all these new wonder weapons to guard and protect you all. And it's a money-making racket. It is, as Eisenhower warned, the military-industrial complex. Which brings us back to our favorite warplane, the F-35. The world's most expensive warplane. Software, it means the onboard cannon won't work till at least, 2019, I think they're saying? Had problems landing on carriers. They had to redesign the complete arrestor hook system. Still can't fly in the rain, can't fly in fog, can't fly near lightning. The helmet fire control system, $700,000 each, is still not working. And now it turns out somebody made a little tiny itsy-bitsy mistake with the bomb bay. Because the original statement of requirements for the F-35B was that it would hold 8 of these small diameter bombs, version 2, in the bomb bay. But somebody made a mistake and only 4 will actually fit in. Our bad, whoopsie. But if you buy a second F-35, then you can deliver all 8 of those weapons. They're only, $107, $110 million apiece? Over in Syria, things are not going very well. 35 killed as Al-Qaeda overruns U.S.-backed Syrian rebel base. It's hard to figure out who's fighting who in Syria, except, of course, that the U.S. is still insistent that Assad has to go. But definitely the U.S.-backed rebels are not having a good time of it between Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Syria's own government forces. Now, as you've probably heard on the corporate media, Iraq moves against the Islamic State in Tikrit. They're launching a massive operation to recapture Tikrit. Now, what's really going on here is the U.S. puppet regime in Baghdad is moving against the people of Iraq who do not wish to be ruled by the U.S. puppet regime in Baghdad. ISIS is a made-up enemy, and they have gone to tremendous propaganda effort to just get you conditioned, brainwashed to just hate ISIS wherever you hear the word. Beheadings, burned kittens, beat-up puppy dogs. And now, here's the latest one. This is being reported over in governmentslaves.info. Apparently, ISIS militants killed a young man, cooked him up, and fed him to his mother, and then told her afterwards what she'd been eating. Ooh, those horrible, horrible ISIS people. I think William Shakespeare ought to sue for intellectual property violation, because this is a storyline right out of Titus Andronicus. And if you look at this extreme claim, it should be obvious. Everything they're coming out with these videos that ISIS is doing is designed to provoke the maximum rage and disgust. They're killing Christians, they're beheading women, they're destroying the museum. So that the U.S. government can get you to go along with the invasion of any country on planet Earth. Fling your babies onto the enemy's bayonets just by saying, oh, ISIS is there. And they're already claiming ISIS is now in all regions of Libya, which leads us to this other story out of Breitbart. Reports indicate Egypt, Italy, and Russia now planning military action in Libya to teach them that once you are conquered, you stay conquered. How dare you kick out your imperial puppet regime? Now then, over the weekend, I had a chance to watch Citizenfour. This is this amazing award-winning documentary about Edward Snowden. And it's on HBO right now. It's on HBO On Demand. And if you have not seen it, you should. Claire and I watched it twice. And even though Edward Snowden kept saying, I don't want to be the focus, this is about the surveillance state, the documentary does focus quite a bit on him and what he went through. And it is a very well-made documentary. And it deserves the awards it's won, and you really should make a point of seeing it. It's called Citizenfour. And it does show Edward Snowden as an ordinary guy caught in extraordinary circumstances, local Hawaii boy, and what he went through and the evolution of the story. And it is a story that needs to get out there. And no, he is not a spy, as defined under the Espionage Act. He's a whistleblower. This country used to protect whistleblowers. Not anymore. Whistleblowers are dangerous to the national security because we have got to spy on people. So, anyway, moving right along here, the Department of Defense has now released the evidence of Snowden's damages to national security. This is reported in Activist Post. There was a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit filed by Vice News saying exactly what did Snowden damage that you are going after him with the Espionage Act. And the DOD responded to the Freedom of Information Act by releasing a list of the damages. It is entirely redacted. They must have gone through a whole case of those black magic markers. It's absolutely a joke to say that this is a proper response to the Freedom of Information Act. Because what Snowden released was evidence of a government that is no longer complying with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and hence, by that very action, has delegitimized itself. And they don't want you thinking about that, how a government that refuses to play by the rules isn't really the lawful government any longer. We'll be right back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. And before I go back to the news, I want to respond to that segment in the SRN news break where they have the recording of Netanyahu during this morning's speech to AIPAC about how we cannot allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons because then they would have the means to destroy Israel. Well, Israel's government and its supporters in the U.S. have been screaming that Iran is within weeks of a nuclear bomb all the way back to the 1980s, and it hasn't happened. And history is against them. Iran has not started a war of aggression against anybody in over 200 years. It's not in their nature. They just want to be left alone to run their country, sell their oil, and make their own decisions about what's best for Iran and the Iranian people. There's really nothing wrong with that. And Netanyahu is out there. First of all, he's raising on a busted flush with his own Mossad saying, we don't see any evidence of nuclear weapons development. And with the United States government now acknowledging that Israel is a nuclear power with hydrogen bombs. So let's say, hypothetically, that Iran produces a nuclear weapon. What will they do with it? They might put it in a museum of technology. They might march it down the streets of Tehran in a military parade, but they're not going to use it. Because the result would be instant nuclear annihilation from both Israel and the United States of America. And Iran's leadership is many things. They're not insane. Like every other world leader, they dream of a future for their country where school children will be forced to memorize their name. Their pictures will be on the coinage and the postage stamps and in the history books. And they don't want to destroy their own nation. And Netanyahu's out there with the big lie, and of course, AIPAC is thunderous applause. Oh yes, Iran's the bad guy. We're good, they're bad. And no doubt tomorrow in the United States Congress there'll be another shameful display of the elected representatives of the United States of America leaping to their feet like trained sea lions to applaud Netanyahu with everything that he says. Because AIPAC has already sent out word. Those who do not stand and give ovations will feel the wrath of AIPAC next election. Iran is not a threat to world peace. Israel is, and the United States. They can't seem to go 6 months without drone striking or attacking or covertly overthrowing some other nation. Anyway. Now, let's talk about this torture center in Chicago and what it really means. This is effectively a Gitmo inside the United States of America. This little facility, this black site, and people who've been there are now coming forward. And apparently what's inside this black site in Chicago, being run by the civilian police, this is not NSA, CIA, or FBI or anybody else. This is the Chicago police running this torture center, where they've got shackles. They shackle people to the wall, keep them there standing for days on end, or shackle them to a bench in stress positions. There's been at least one reported forced drugging with heroin to try and get a confession. And if there's one in Chicago, there are probably more of these things all across the United States of America, which tells us this is not the United States of America any longer. This is the Fourth Reich, where you can be disappeared and tortured. This Homan Square is a national outrage. It's getting a lot of coverage in the foreign press. Not really much of a mention at all here in the American corporate media, for some strange reason. Apparently there's been another police shooting incident out in Los Angeles, where police were looking for a robbery suspect, and they were down in the Mission District, where the homeless congregate. And there was this one homeless man sleeping on the ground, who apparently did not obey the police orders as quickly as the police wanted to. They tased him once and then hauled off and shot him 5 times, killing him. Was caught on a smartphone video. It's gone viral. And of course the officers will not be charged because the shooting was consistent with departmental policy, which is if you don't do what we tell you to do when we tell you to do it, we will kill you. Now, let's move on to the economy here. The news is not good. Despite the soaring stock market today, the NASDAQ broke a record. The Dow is up there. It's just, if you're one of the players on the stock market, things are really looking good. And I'm sure the people who are in the stock market are smart enough to realize their investment in a stock isn't really going to produce a return that's worth the price. They're hopping on, letting the government riggers drive it up, then they're going to sell out, and as long as the government is going to go on rigging it upward, they'll play along, even though they know it's a fraud. It's wrong, because they're making money. Now, there's an article over at Zero Hedge, Housing Bubble Redux, and they're talking about the subprime auto loan market. This is a repeat of 2008 all over again, where the lenders were making car loans to people who really couldn't afford them. But you need a car, you get desperate. They bundled those loans together and offered them as investment properties. That's beginning to crack. The student loan bubble is beginning to crack. Now, over in Europe, the agreement made by the Greek government, the new Greek government, is already in serious trouble. It has come out that the deal was actually crafted by the European Commission, not Tsipras. And Tsipras is being arm-twisted into going along with it, which has now enraged the Greek people who voted Tsipras into power on an anti-banker, anti-austerity platform, which is already null and void. And apparently the Greek government, according to Reuters, is saying that they're going to be borrowing money from the pension funds in order to repay the IMF. Which sounds like an interesting idea until you realize the U.S. government did exactly the same thing back during the Clinton years. They borrowed from the Social Security Trust Fund, and they have never been able to pay it back. And that's why they're talking about increasing Social Security taxes, raising the age of retirement, cutting benefits. They're defaulting on the American worker because the American worker can't do anything about it. Now, here's a new development. Over in Austria, somebody has discovered, either there was a horrible mistake or somebody was trying to cover it up, there is a 7.6 billion euro gap on the Hypo Alpe Bad Bank books. Now Austria is going to have to ask for a debt restructuring. And the European Commission, the European Union, the IMF, and the World Bank that were towing that hard line with Greece is going to have to say no to Austria. The collapse is beginning to spread. And behind it all is that hard reality that nobody has the courage to talk about. When you have a privately owned central bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, debt grows faster than the available money supply until debt crashes the entire system. And nobody in the corporate media, nobody in the financial media has the courage to say this is the root cause of everything we're seeing going on right now. We'll be right back after these commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line. We'll take that call just as soon as we come back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. Before we take the phone call, quick breaking story. We just put it up at whatreallyhappened.com. Apparently over in Debaltsevo, cleaning up in the aftermath of the rout of Kiev's forces, they have found a battle flag from the United States Marine Corps. They got a photo of it. It's on Twitter. We've copied it. It's on my website. So it looks like U.S. forces have already been on the ground in Ukraine, and apparently didn't do all that well as far as Debaltsevo was concerned. All righty, we're going to take a phone call here. Rob in Minnesota. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Just in report from the trenches here back in the domestic area. I'm in Minnesota, and our local university had a finance quiz bowl where they invited 3 college or high school groups in to compete, and they had an editor, economics editor from NPR, Minnesota Public Radio, come in and host it, and then that night he gave a lyceum. Which I kind of question the origin of that word nowadays.
Okay.
He's here to lie. Come on out and see him. Anyway, he gave this nice speech, and I mean, advice on how to manage personal finances and that, and it would have been fantastic advice 40 years ago. Now this guy's he's our age, and so his whole theme of the thing was frugal. Set money aside, put it in the bank, pay off your loans. You have student debt, but we have ways to manage that. And, just pay off your loans and put money in the bank. And, over time, your money will grow and you'll have a nice retirement.
Well,
anyway,
we heard the same thing when we were young, and back then it actually made a little bit of sense. College was expensive, but you could work part-time and pay for your college education. That's what I did. I paid for my college education as a professional magician.
Absolutely.
But
that's what I did, too.
The cost of college has grown 10 times faster than the rate of inflation. And scholarships have dried up for ordinary students. They're still there for selected minorities and so forth. But the goal has obviously been to turn college students into debtors, get them on that debt slave hook as soon as possible so the bankers get the majority of the profit from the jobs these college students acquire after graduating. Except, of course, the jobs aren't really there, which is why we're looking at a collapse of the student loan bubble.
I got a chance to ask a question at the end, and I kind of was very polite. I said, you're talking about personal stuff. Do you mind if I go on to a bigger scale picture? And he goes, yeah, go ahead. And I said, could you explain too big to fail? And Mike, literally, this is what he said. Too big to fail. That's where if you have a profit, it's privatized. If you have a loss, it's socialized. I just about fell off my chair. I said, that's the very definition of a fascism. And he goes, oh, no, that's not fascism. That's managing the economy. Just side pedal for a while, and then he kind of looks out of the corner of the eye at me, and then he turns his head and goes to the other end of the audience. I wanted to continue on it. But then this kid up there, earlier in his speech, he talked about how all the central bankers from around the world were drinking from the same Kool-Aid. Another time I fell off my chair. And so this student, says, earlier you said all the central bankers are drinking from the same Kool-Aid. Well, I'm not ready to drink from that Kool-Aid. What do you think of Bitcoin? And he goes, well, the problem with Bitcoin is, there's only so much of it. So they won't be able to print it. They won't be able to make more of it as it becomes, and it was just
That's completely wrong. That's completely wrong. I mean, the Bitcoin mining systems. Now, I think that's a crowdsourced, public key, encryption breaker. But the idea of a virtual currency is it can grow in proportion to the population, something a commodity-based currency cannot always do, because it's a finite limit on the amount of gold and silver and copper and the rest of it. That's why I proposed that a future commodity-based currency be based on a unit of electricity, a kilowatt hour. The electro, because as the population grows and the power generation capacity to support that population grows, the available monetary supply keeps pace with the population.
One of the college professors there said, I've been curious, with all the quantitative easing, how come we haven't seen any inflation? He goes, well, that's because with the new technology, the central bankers have such a, finger on the pulse of what's going on, that they've been able to increase the money supply just enough to keep up with our economic growth, with all these creation of new jobs and all this stuff.
Oh, man. I'm beginning to really appreciate your definition of a lyceum.
I did go up. He didn't have any books for sale, but he set up a table for people who brought books in to sign, and I went up and talked to him for a little bit, and I dropped I said, well, I kind of am a student of Gerald Celente and Max Kaiser. I figured those names are out there enough that, and he said, no, never heard of them. And I go, well, I got another guy that I really pay a lot of attention to, and he's got a video on YouTube that's gone viral called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. And I mentioned it to him on 3 different occasions. So hopefully he'll look it up. And I'm going to send him an email here with the link also.
I rather doubt it. Well, would you do me a favor? I would rather you send him the link to the actual article at my website, because there's a lot more detail in there than is in the video. And the video is great, and it's certainly popularized the idea of all wars are bankers' wars. But the actual article has a lot more information in there. It's kept up to date. So,
well, do you want me to give you the guy's name and his email is easy enough to figure out if you want to have the Rivero Rangers bombard him with it?
No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not trying to tick anybody off, but just send him the link to the article, and he'll either read it and laugh at it or not. I understand that somebody on Wall Street actually tried to rebut my 11th Marble article, and got into all this weird academic jargon to try and say, and see, that's really makes it, and apparently it got zero traction out there. And it does seem that if I have one gift to bring to the debate, it's that I can take these complex issues and I can reframe them I can de-jargonize them. I can bring them out from behind the shadow of all the jargon that's used to obfuscate these things. Anyway, listen, we're coming up on a commercial break here, Rob. I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. And let's see, moving right along here, the economic saber rattling. I guess that would be a calculator rattling. Moscow threatens Washington painful countermeasures in case of new sanctions. So they're already out there saying, we've got to sanction Russia more and more. And all of these sanctions come back to hurt the West, and it simply drives Russia and the BRICS nations tighter together in opposition to the U.S. dollar. We'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about the economic news around the world. And apparently over in Russia, they are now openly offering Russia's oil and gas for sale internationally for the ruble. Another reason for the U.S. government to be trying to accelerate war, because this is what the war is all about, protecting the propped up paper dollar against the rising ruble and yuan. That's what these wars are all about. Dragging the world back to Bretton Woods, where everybody has to go to the U.S. and borrow dollars at interest to do any cross-border trade or banking. And all natural resources on the planet are sold for U.S. dollars, which have to be borrowed at interest from the U.S. It's a wonderful little scam. This is how the U.S. government collected its imperial tax following World War II. Because they had the nuclear weapons and you will do it our way. or we'll Hiroshima you. And apparently the U.S. government is, for all of its wealth it's taking away from us, it's still in trouble because apparently over in Minnesota, at the Maplewood Mall, the federal government has been served eviction papers. Specifically, the Armed Forces Career Center has not paid their rent for the last 6 months. And now they're being evicted. Good. Get rid of them. Save the lives of our children. Shut it on down here. Alrighty, everybody is still trying to figure out what's going on with net neutrality, and apparently the issue is not over and done with. We're hearing talk about getting Congress to pass a law to undo the FCC's changes. We still don't know what all those changes are. The full document apparently is still not available. And everybody is concerned that it is Obamacare for the Internet. If you like your Internet, you can keep your Internet. We're heading for exactly the same thing. And we're seeing all of these politicians, both in and out of the United States, saying now's the time to control the Internet, to control what's going to be on there. Francois Holland is saying that, anything anti-Israel should be banned from the Internet. So, even Ron Paul is out there saying, Internet, rest in peace. And we know how afraid corporate America and the government and even the churches are afraid of the Internet. They're just not able to deal with a literate, skeptical population able to share information peer-to-peer. And what we're seeing them do right now is a mirror of what happened when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing and books became affordable to the middle class, literacy exploded, people were able to go out and find out for themselves what was going on, put out opinions and analysis that conflicted with the ruling class, and they tried to control it, and they failed miserably. Because people ultimately want the truth, and they'll go where they need to go to get that truth. Now, there's a lesson from Gutenberg's time that I think our government and our corporate leadership need to understand. Those institutions that were able to evolve and adapt to the new environment of new mass communication for the populace, they're still with us. They survived. Because evolving to meet a changing environment is necessary for survival. Those institutions that could not evolve and adapt, who were trying desperately to take the world back to the way it was in the Dark Ages, they pretty much collapsed and they went away. And we're seeing exactly the same thing happen now. Yes, they're coming down hard on the Internet. They're never going to make it go away. There's too much of the economy is now dependent on the Internet. And everything done to discourage people from using the Internet for personal communication will adversely affect the online retail providers. Because we're not going to go to the Internet just to shop for something. We can sit at home and watch TV or read the newspapers for that. Or we can go down to the mall and just get that immediate gratification of, ooh, I want that. Here's the money, let me take it home. And we have seen in other countries like China, efforts to have the government monitor and control the content of the Internet are doomed to fail because those people who really want to know what's going on will find ways to get things done. The Darknet, packet radio. The samizdat brought down the Soviet Union using nothing more than fax machines. Apparently, George Soros and the Ford Foundation funded the push for net neutrality to the tune of $196 million. I don't think they did that out of the generosity of their own heart. Now, here's a very alarming story that may portend what is getting ready to happen. This is over in Global Research. Google is going to change the way that they rank websites on what they call facts rather than popularity. The problem with that is Google is partnering with known partisan debunking outlets to decide whether a website is truthful or not. In other words, if you are saying anything that is in conflict with the official U.S. government or corporate position on anything, you will be ranked untruthful, and Google will bury you down at the bottom of the search rankings. I guess that's the new definition of googliness. Anyway, this is a very bizarre story. It was reported in an Investment Watch blog, and I'm scratching my head trying to figure out what's going on here. The TSA has issued a new warning of a catastrophic threat to airliners. Thermite. Because apparently none of their detectors can find it. And even more bizarrely, they've included in their warning the recipe on how to make thermite, which is not that difficult. So this is the new booga booga. Oh, we've got to have a new thermite detection system. It'll cost so many billions of tax dollars, but without it, our aircraft are under threat from thermite. Do you know in all of its years of operation, TSA has not actually caught a real terrorist? They've fondled a lot of wives and daughters, girlfriends, occasionally boyfriends. They've stolen a lot of stuff from luggage. They've absolutely devastated tourism in places like here in Hawaii. And they dropped and smashed a laptop of mine up in Seattle. But they haven't actually caught a terrorist. Eisenhower's military-industrial complex has now spawned children. The security-industrial complex, the medical-industrial complex. And they're all living down to Eisenhower's worst predictions of how these large industrial bodies gain so much wealth and power, they dictate the course of the nation to their own advantage. And we're seeing it here. Alrighty, Hillary Clinton, who apparently is the subject of advertisements right now, questioning her lack of support for Netanyahu. There's another story about there over in finance. Apparently, in Silicon Valley, Hillary Clinton gave a speech on what is wrong with the middle class, for which she was paid $300,000. And I think that demonstrates that Hillary Clinton really doesn't know what it's like to be middle class in this day or age. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, there seems to be a lot of strange deaths going on right now, like Boris Nemtsov. Apparently, over in Missouri, the Republican candidate for governor in 2016 got really, really depressed, committed suicide. The guy's name was Tom Schweich. He was currently the state auditor, and apparently he had called a press conference for just after the time that he was found dead. Now, the official story is that he was very upset at anti-Semitic slurs aimed at him, because his ancestry is Jewish, even though he himself has a different religion. And I don't think so. I'm wondering what he'd been auditing at the time of his death. And people who commit suicide don't decide to do it just before a press conference. Kind of interesting here. Now, over at Investment Watch blog, apparently they're reporting on a CBS investigation where thousands of veterans' disability claims were intentionally ignored by the Veterans Administration. This VA scandal is not going away. This government is perfectly happy to take your son or daughter, spend all kinds of money on them to turn them into a robot that will kill on demand, ship them to the four corners of the earth. It's just an expression. Don't get on my case about flat earth. Get them doped up on psychiatric medication, expose them to depleted uranium, get shot at, blown up. When they come back home, they are abandoned. The VA is just another U.S. government theater production to make it look like the government is going to care for you if you lose something important off of your body in these wars for the bankers. So it makes it easier for the recruiters to say, yes, come on, join the military, you'll have adventure, you'll have a career, and if something bad happens, don't worry, we'll take care of you afterwards. That part of the promise is not being kept. Something to keep in mind if a young person in your family is talking about, well, I can't find a job anywhere else, I guess I'm going to have to join the Army. There's been a new development over at the Internal Revenue Service regarding the probe into targeting of conservatives, nonprofit groups, dissenters. And apparently the IRS has come up with 32,000 emails that they had earlier said were lost when the dog ate Lois Lerner's hard drive, and the backup tapes had been recycled, and the company that was hired to do off-site backups had been let go, conveniently timed. And now Judicial Watch is saying this is now worthy of a criminal probe because it is federal law that all communications be kept because technically they are public records. Apparently one of Lois Lerner's emails included a quote, "No one will ever believe that both your hard drive and mine crashed within a week." There's your smoking hard drive right there. Here's a very alarming story. This is out of townhall.com. Apparently earlier today, White House press spokesslug Josh Earnest confirmed President Obama is, quote, very interested, end quote, in the idea of raising taxes through unilateral executive action. Earnest was responding to a question about Bernie Sanders calling on Obama to raise more than $100 billion in taxes. And Earnest said, quote, the president certainly has not indicated any reticence in using his executive authority to try and advance an agenda that benefits middle-class Americans. No, it's not going to benefit middle-class Americans. Who do you think they're going to be raising the taxes on? They're not going to be raising the taxes on the 1%, most of whom have their money over in HSBC anyway. They're not going to raise taxes on corporations. Obama just lowered taxes on corporations. And I would remind the White House, who I know is listening to this show, all revenue measures must originate in the United States House of Representatives. The president does not have the authority under the Constitution to get out his little pad of paper and his pen and say, raise everybody's taxes. Signed, B. Obama. Now, there's another story. This is actually reported on a Fox News affiliate. And it has to do with a case that has been languishing in the courts for years, ever since the Oklahoma City bombing. And it has to do with this attorney, Jesse Trentadue, who is suing the FBI over the death of his brother, Kenneth Trentadue, who was at one point mistaken for one of the identified bombers in Oklahoma City. That's before they settled on the story about, oh, it was just Tim McVeigh all by himself. And Kenneth Trentadue was killed while in federal custody during an interrogation, very much like how Ibrahim Todashev suddenly attacked his FBI interrogators and had to be shot several times, including the crown of the head, down in Florida, when they were trying to get him to implicate the Tsarnaev brothers in a drug murder. And this, of course, leads to the issue. Is the FBI engaged in witness tampering? Of course they are. It's part of their job. 21 years ago, the event that got me started on this path involved a case of FBI tampering with a witness. In this case, the widow of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, who was found in Fort Marcy Park with a gun next to him, dark blued steel revolver, almost black. And in the FBI's own FD 302 form for the interview, you can see where the FBI was trying to get Lisa Foster to identify the gun as belonging to Vince Foster. And Lisa Foster says the only gun Vince Foster had was a silver-colored gun. That's the description by the guy writing the FBI report. Vince Foster had one handgun he inherited from his father, silver-colored. Obviously not the gun found with the body. Now, when the FBI's report went through and was published in the final report, the reference to silver color was taken out to make it look like Lisa Foster had identified the gun found with the body as belonging to Vince Foster. Yes, that's what the FBI does. Okay, Bill O'Reilly, more embarrassments there. Former colleagues dispute his L.A. riot story. He's finally had to admit he did not, in fact, witness the killing of Protestants up in Ireland. Just more and more and more, and he's still got his job. I cannot tell you how it rankles me that these people with these multi-million-dollar salaries are exposed as liars, both in the official story and the unofficial story, and they still have their jobs. I've been 21 years here trying to get the truth out, living on the financial edge. It annoys me greatly. Now, here's a good story. You're going to love this one. There's a lady named Virginia Trioli, and she is host on a TV show. Her co-host, guy by the name of Roland, and it's a morning news program, and Virginia Trioli has been hopping onto Hillary Clinton's bandwagon about equal pay for equal work. We have to have equal pay for equal work. It's a scandal in this country. Turns out Virginia earns $85,000 a year more than her male co-host. And still she demands we must have equality. All right, take a pay cut then. The numbers do not support this feminist propaganda of inequality and harassment. They're trying to basically bring back the feminist movement in the 1990s to support Hillary by getting all the women in the world to say, women in the U.S. to say, we've got to support Hillary, we need equality. You already got all that stuff. But that's going to be a big part of Hillary's 2016 campaign here. Little reminder, story out of Nation of Change, LA Times reporter caught falsifying articles with the CIA. And I'll bet he still has his job, too, at a very generous salary. We'll be right back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Getting on back to stories about police abuse, I had somebody who wrote in reporting that these domestic police interrogation centers are supposedly authorized by the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act. And I have to go back and look at that. But even if they are, aren't they supposed to be focused on terror suspects? And according to these reports we're getting out of Chicago, the police are using them to basically beat confessions out of ordinary criminals for whom they cannot find admissible evidence. And they're using torture to get a confession with which to throw you in prison. Is that the United States of America you thought you lived in? Anyway, down in Florida, the Broward Sheriff's Office decided to run a prostitution sting. They had 2 undercover female officers place an ad in a local paper for a threesome and promptly snared the Miami Gardens police chief. So it's amazing. We had another story over the weekend about a cop got caught going into a massage parlor, and he got caught because that massage parlor was under investigation for selling happy endings. And apparently they had done a black bag operation where they had cameras installed inside this establishment with which they were collecting evidence here. Meanwhile, over in Germany, former German politician Sebastian Edethe has confessed in court to using his official work laptop to download child porn. What is it about government service that attracts these kind of sickos? Whether it's the pedophilia scandal in Great Britain, the Franklin scandal here in the United States of America. I mean, our leaders like to think of themselves as a breed apart from the ordinary plebes, and maybe they are. And if they are, they're extraordinarily sick people. Why do we allow people like this to be in control over us? Why do we bow to their authority? Alrighty, let's see. We're going to take a phone call here. James from Tokyo. Ohio gozaimasu. What's on your mind today?
Michael, I have to stop listening to your show while I'm sleeping. Last Friday, I had a dream that Tokyo was frozen over by global warming, and I had to pay a carbon tax. The Ukrainians were shooting at us, and it ended on a bad note when the Israelis came and bulldozed down our building. I can't listen to you anymore when I'm sleeping.
Oh, well, you should see the nightmares that I'm getting. But listen, you don't have to worry about Tokyo freezing over from global warming. You've got all that heat coming out of Fukushima.
Well, that's why I was calling you, actually.
Okay.
I should be getting my radiation detector pretty soon. And if I find some stuff, I just wanted to know if I could post some of it on what really happened.
Absolutely, absolutely.
More aware of the issue.
For a while, we were doing daily radiation readings here on Oahu, but, you know, after the first few weeks, things leveled off here. My equipment is only able to measure airborne radiation. I can't test for radiation in seawater. I can't test for radiation in fish. I don't have the necessary equipment to do that reliably. But again, the North Pacific Gyre Current took most of that contamination to the north of us, to the west coast of North America. Eventually, it will circulate back, and we'll start getting it. But it's an issue. We're hearing apparently that spontaneous fission is still taking place under the grounds of the Fukushima power plant. The huge amounts of radioactive water, they're still having to just dump it in the Pacific. The local fisheries are very upset because they're not being notified that this is going on. And it's really a problem because that contaminated seafood gets shipped all over the world.
Absolutely, yeah. They didn't tell the fishermen. The fishermen are upset. I mean, I'm upset. I own a house about 100 kilometers right down the coast from Fukushima, right on the ocean. So that's part of the reason why, you know, I also bought it to check my land out and everything and my water. This detector I have can detect also fish and water, but only beta and gamma radiation. But I'd really like, you know, I just really appreciate that I can, you know, let people know and that you're willing.
Well, yeah, if you come up with some numbers, we'll put them up there. I'm trying to remember if the prevailing current off that coast of Japan, I think it goes north. So if you are south of Fukushima, you're probably out of immediate threat, but eventually the entire Pacific Ocean is going to be carrying this stuff to some extent. And again, the radiation in the seawater, yes, it does get diluted. It does settle down to the bottom of the ocean. The problem is a fish that is contaminated with radiation off the coast of Fukushima is still just as dangerous off the coast of South America. And we do know that there's a large
fish, you know, kill-off that you're reading all the time, and you know, off California, off Vancouver, and the mainstream media is like, you know, why is this happening? We don't know. I mean, but no one ever seems to really look into it. You know, I never see any article stating that, well, they tested these fish for, you know, radiation or...
Well, they stopped all the testing for radiation. You know, you never ask a question you don't want the answer to. And you've got the nuclear industry is using their lobbyists to keep this thing tamped down. General Electric, which designed and built some of those reactors at Fukushima, they want this story to go away because they're still selling that same reactor design to other people, other countries. And they're now coming up against stiff competition from Russia because following Chernobyl, Russia completely redesigned their nuclear reactors to be far, far safer. And they're now seen as attractive, far more attractive than American reactor designs around the world. And they apparently they've signed a contract to do another power station in Iran. They're going to do one in Egypt. And the American companies are trying to keep a lid on Fukushima because that works against them in these negotiations.
Well, it seems like there's a better way to, you know, heat water I mean, if you look at, what Iceland does and everything. But anyway, that's all I had to say. I'd like you to, I want to continue listening, and I'll still keep you on when I'm sleeping. The occasional nightmare is worth it because you have such a great...
I'll put some light, fluffy stuff in there so that you can have pleasant dreams. Kittens, puppy dogs, rainbows, flowers, and that kind of thing, all right? So thank you for the phone call.
Bye-bye.
We're going to let you go here, and I know we got another caller on the line, but I'm going to leave you until after the commercial break here. Iceland obviously has the availability of geothermal. We have that here in Hawaii. We're not taking as much advantage of it as we probably could. But geothermal is not going to work for a lot of the world unless you drill down literally through the mantle to the Earth's core, and at which point that might actually be viable. I mean, they've developed deep core drilling for the oil industry. Why not do the same thing for geothermal? I am convinced that we could have safe nuclear power, but the problem is the safety systems get cut for budgetary reasons. And remember the Japanese power station at Onagawa? And there was this story about one of the original engineers for that plant fought a one-man battle to not cut any corners on the safety systems. And as a result, Onagawa was the only power station along that coastline that wasn't damaged by the quake and tsunami. And sadly, this gentleman had passed away before he saw his vindication. But every one of these disasters, whether it's Challenger or Fukushima or the Gulf oil disaster, we find some money junkie somewhere said, we don't need to pay for this. We don't need to pay for the required maintenance on the blowout preventer. We don't need to put the emergency generators up on stilts or up on a hill. We don't need a really tall tsunami wall. And the disaster happens, and they drop the losses and the consequences on the public. It was ever thus. I think nuclear power can be made safe. I'd like to see more thorium cycle reactors. I'd like to see the same kind of effort put into provoking war with Russia into developing fusion power. But our government has other priorities. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go right to the telephones here. Apostle in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing fine.
Hoping you and Claire are both well.
Yeah, at the moment, yes.
But I was wondering, do you think tomorrow you could put your voice stress analyzer on Netanyahu's speech?
Yes, I probably.
I know it's going to ping.
I will do that.
Like a lie.
I would actually say the opposite. I think he's such a pure sociopath that it'll register absolutely nothing.
Do you think also it's possible that you can put like a poll on your website as to how many standing ovations he's going to get in Congress?
Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll have a little betting pool going on here. Whoever guesses the correct number gets a V for Vendetta DVD or something.
Also, Veterans Today put out a thing, the 10 best reasons why Netanyahu's speech is a good thing. A great article. I don't know if it was you posted it earlier on your site, but a definite read for your listeners.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that, pointing that one out, okay?
Okay, thank you, Mike.
All right, and we're going to switch over here to Dennis in Oregon. Aloha, Dennis, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks. Hello. I like your idea of a kilowatt standard, and it's caused me to think quite a bit about it, and it really is, I think it has a lot of potential, and I'd like to add another unit of value, and that would be a kilogram of hydrogen to go. I mean, you have pennies and dollars with kilowatts, and then you have $100 bill or a $1,000 bill with a kilogram of hydrogen, which
a kilogram of hydrogen doesn't really have that much value to it. And so
it will, because Japan is about to introduce hydrogen cars in the United States, and they're converting their entire society into a hydrogen society. And Honda is going to introduce a hydrogen car in California in 2016. You'll be able to buy Toyota's car later this year in the summer. And
I wonder how they solved the problem of storing the hydrogen, because it's such a tiny atom. One of the big headaches for developing hydrogen-fueled vehicles is coming up with a container that the hydrogen just doesn't seep right through the walls. I mean, you remember...
Before before Toyota made cars, they made clothing. And they've woven carbon fiber tanks, and they've tested these tanks by shooting them with 50 caliber guns. They've crash tested the cars. They've had a hydrogen car driving around since 1999, as well as Honda has too. And if it's hard to store, then Walmart needs to know, because they're in the process of switching out their battery-powered forklifts to hydrogen fuel cells. The hydrogen can be stored, and it can be stored today, and it's going to be huge. I can't believe that I live to see the end of the day that gas is needed, and no one knows, no one cares. Japan is, if you want to read about hydrogen, just type in hydrogen in Japan. They're going wild.
I'll take a look at that, because you're absolutely right. It should be the next major step, and if they've solved the storage problem and the cryogenic problem, or are they just pressurizing it as a gas? I guess if they're doing carbon.
700 bar is the latest standard, and the tanks are tested to 20,000 psi. 700 bar is 10,000 psi. The tanks are good for twice that. And they don't leak. They're like, unlike a Tesla. If you buy a Tesla Model S and you go to the airport in it, and you get on a plane and you come back 2 weeks later, you're going to lose 5 miles a day unless you've got that thing plugged in, and no one's going to offer free electricity to plug in 1 million cars everywhere. So it actually, not only does it not leak, but it beats the electric car standards that are available.
Okay, the unknown part of that equation, and I'm in favor of the technology, don't get me wrong about that. The unknown part of the equation, though, is what it's going to cost to produce hydrogen on that kind of a scale for 1 million cars, because that's what's going to determine the price of getting a fill-up. And I always envision. Let me finish this. I always envisioned an idea of taking all these offshore oil platforms, getting rid of the oil infrastructure, and just putting either thorium cycle or fusion reactors on them. Suck up the seawater, use simple electrolysis to separate the hydrogen from the oxygen, release the oxygen into the atmosphere so we can all go on breathing, and then commercially sell the hydrogen. And that would be a very reasonable way. But if everybody goes to a hydrogen car, there's going to have to be a gigantic hydrogen production infrastructure. And that, of course, is going to have its own risks with it. Think Hindenburg.
Well, Hindenburg is a really bad comparison, because it's been made safe.
Okay.
I mean, hello?
Yeah, that's coming from your end. Anyway, listen, I thank you very much for
no, please, let me just say one more thing.
Okay.
Honda, in the United Kingdom, Honda has built a solar hydrogen station at their factory in Swindon. If you type, I'll send this stuff to you, because I think you should dedicate a portion of your website to this. This is the biggest thing to happen in energy in our lifetimes, Mike.
I think I saw that on Top Gear.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
If you've got a house there in Hawaii and you put solar panels on the house 10 years ago, and they've already paid for themselves by producing energy for you, and everything from today on is free, how much does a kilogram of hydrogen produced via solar electrolysis cost?
I would have to work out the numbers on that, because solar power.
51 kilowatts.
All right, Dennis.
51.
Dennis, thank you very much here. I've only got a minute before the commercial break, and I would like to get a few words in on my own radio show here. Solar powered electrolysis, I have to work out the numbers on that, because solar cells are still, at least at the consumer level, only about 30% efficient, and electrolysis is a slow process. I'm sure that as a demonstrator, you can have solar-powered electrolysis. Whether it can support the volume of hydrogen production necessary to support an entire nation of hydrogen cars, that I think would require solar panels that pretty much cover the entire nation itself. And so from a practical aspect of deployability, I'm not sure that that's going to work out. In theory, if they've solved the problem of containing the hydrogen so it doesn't leak out of the tanks, then this is definitely something worth looking into. But again, Where will the hydrogen come from? That's a big open-ended issue there. It's going to require infrastructure on the scale of the current petroleum infrastructure to produce all of that. Alrighty, so we're coming up here on our commercial break. We're going to take a few minutes and we'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. We're getting some new developments coming out of the Netanyahu-a-thon going on in Washington, D.C. Story coming out of WLKY, Netanyahu to lay out elements of the Iran deal. They're basically teasing that during his speech before Congress tomorrow, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will lay out the details of what he understands to be the nuclear agreement between world powers and Iran, with the goal of prompting the Congress to question the administration of Barack Obama and to find a way to delay the March 24th deadline for a political agreement. And apparently the threat is working, because we are now seeing a report from Reuters where Obama has now changed the U.S. bargaining position at the table, saying Iran must halt all nuclear work for 10 years for a deal to be reached. That's the deal breaker. Iran will never agree to that. Iran will hold up the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran has signed and ratified, and the United States has signed and ratified, and say everything we're doing, we're allowed to do under this treaty the U.S. government signed. So it looks like Obama has succumbed to the pressure from Netanyahu and the war hawks. I would not at all be surprised if Netanyahu is privately encouraging Congress to go ahead and impeach Obama for any one of the numerous impeachable offenses that he's committed so they can get Biden in the Oval Office. Everybody's playing hardball, and your sons and daughters will pay the price for it. Doesn't matter how it works out. It's going to be bad for us. All right, so coming into the last half hour of our program, it's time to talk about human-caused global warming, because if you thought because February was over, it's a dead issue, no, actually. Over in northern Wisconsin, the Apostle Islands National Lake Shore is now showing these massive ice caves several miles outside Bayfield. And the park officials have confirmed that the ice on Lake Superior is thick enough to support tourist traffic. And so they're going on in there and they're taking pictures of these beautiful blue ice caves. And they're amazing, amazing pictures. This is, I should remind you, March. Okay, over at CTV News in Montreal. February cold in Montreal breaks 115-year-old record. Record temps for New York City's Boston close to snowfall record. I discovered quite by accident one of our neighbors here. Her son lives in Boston, and he's been sending her pictures and messages about how awesome this winter has been. And of course I get that from my family living in the New England area. And it's not confined to New England, despite what all the carbon Nazis are trying to claim. Oh, it's just New England. The rest of the world is broiling. Northeast Ohio breaks their all-time February record for cold temperatures. Let's see, over here in Illinois, February 2015 ties 140-year record for cold temperatures. We're talking about cold temperature records going back to just after the Civil War ended being broken. Cleveland closes out coldest February on record. And by the way, there's another winter storm coming in, Winter Storm Gavin. Snow and record cold to Connecticut. Story out of AccuWeather. More winter storms to kick off March. March coming in like a lion. Actually, it's like a polar bear. And by the way, one of the big carbon Nazi propagandas is, oh, global warming, the polar bears are drowning, they've got no ice to live on, they're becoming an endangered species. Well, first of all, polar bears can swim. They float very well. That white fur, the fur shafts are hollow to improve their insulating property. They've evolved these hollow cores which hold air. Polar bears can sleep floating on the water. It's been determined they can swim at least 60 miles across open water. And by the way, they're not endangered. In fact, they've grown in population so much, they're becoming pests and nuisances. And they're talking about opening up hunting seasons on them. Dixon, Montana is currently under a winter storm warning. So, story, this was actually from last Friday, Daily Mail, snow forecast for all 50 states, which is true, and I coupled it with a very cool photo from down on the Big Island. Somebody was up on Mauna Kea, made a snowman, took a picture of it with Mauna Loa, also covered in snow, in the distance. That's Hawaii you're looking at here. Now remember how the carbon Nazis were saying, oh, the Arctic is melting. Remember, Al Gore predicted 2014 summer was going to be the Arctic completely ice-free. Did not happen. Right now, the North Pole is frozen solid. The South Pole is refreezing. Over the weekend, we had these amazing pictures of frozen surf in New England, like a giant slushy or an icy rolling up on the shore. And remember, salt water freezes at a much lower temperature than fresh water. Fresh water is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Seawater is 28. Another article out of 12160. The Antarctic sea ice has done the exact opposite of what all these climate alarmists predicted. The climate models predicted that the Antarctic ice was going to fade away, and it didn't. Remember last winter, ship went down there to document how the ice was vanishing in Antarctica and got trapped in the ice, had to be saved. And it basically underscores that all these computer models that are being waved at you as proof of the evils of human-caused global warming, they don't work. Because the only thing that validates a computer model is if it can accurately predict what is about to happen. And none of their models have worked. Remember, March 20th, 2000, UK independence. Snowfalls are now a thing of the past. And I'm still getting emails from the carbon Nazis saying, well, we've got a record warm temperature out in this city over here and over here. And, you know, it's kind of weird because these are the same people who every time you get a cold temperature record, they say, that's an anomaly. That's absolutely, you shouldn't pay attention to that one at all. It's obviously bogus data. It's too far out of field. And all these places where they claim to have record high temperatures, do you know where the temperature recording stations are? At the airport, surrounded by jets belching out tons of burning kerosene combustion products here. Now there's a very interesting story over at the Daily Sheeple. At a press conference in Brussels last month, the UN climate chief, who is now unfortunately being forced to leave his job over a sexual harassment charge, and, apparently this is the new one. The one who replaced the engineer. But anyway, the UN climate chief delineated the objectives of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the United Nations and said, quote, this is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution. There it is, admitted by the United Nations. Global warming is not about global warming. It's about tricking you into going along with dramatic changes to the economic model of planet Earth. All to make the money junkies happy. Alrighty, Jeff up in Canada. We've only got about a few seconds before the commercial break, but I wanted to start the phone call. We're going to bring you back in after the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hi there, Mike. Just wanted to talk about the extreme cold weather that we've been having here in the GTA and Toronto area and how it's been fairly consistent. We don't expect to see any warm weather at least up until mid-April. And that's been the same way down here for at least the past, well, as long as I can remember. It was literally since I've been born.
Well, I don't know how old you are, but we know that, you know, the world was warming in the 1990s when they started this hoax. But it sure has changed since then, and it's all due to a decline in solar output. We got to let you go, Jeff. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today. And we were talking about global warming. There's a very interesting article over at Global Research, Science as the New Religion. And the article raises a very relevant point. Back in olden times, the medieval period, even the Renaissance, rulers would use religion to convince people to do what the rulers wanted. You must do this because God wills it. You will be allowed into heaven if you do this. If you will go and conquer the Holy Lands in the crusade, you will get into heaven no matter what kind of a person you were, your private life. Well, religion is on the wane, but that hasn't stopped the rulers who now have adopted the trappings of science to convince people to do what they're supposed to do. And it all works on trust and belief. Now, scientific method is a valid device for determining what is really going on with the world. But individual scientists and scientific organizations driven by funding are just as corruptible as the clergy were. And that's why you see these scientists and organizations like CDC coming out and saying, oh, absolutely, there's no link between vaccines and autism. Then their own scientists come out and say, look, that report the CDC did was a complete fraud. Human-caused global warming, perfect example. They're still out there shouting human-caused global warming as we end another record-setting winter. Looks like the Old Farmer's Almanac was right. And corporate media and NASA and NOAA and the rest of them, they were caught out wrong again. And they're thrashing around trying to convince you that, oh, despite all the snow and ice, 2014 was the hottest year on record. We're doomed unless you agree to let the UN run your life for you, which is, we now know that's the goal. That's why they keep persisting in pushing global warming despite all these cold winters. You'd think most people at this point would be tired of looking like an idiot. And they'd back off and say, oh, see, we stopped human-caused global warming, the winters prove it, and they'd be off to a new endeavor. I mean, the very idea that humans can stop climate change is nonsense. Climate always changes. There has never been a time in the history of this planet where the climate was not changing. This idea that it can be controlled by human endeavor, that's the fantasy that they're trying to sell you in exchange for your money, your obedience, and allowing the United Nations to tell you how to live your life. Anyway, over in Poland, there's a major farmer uprising. They're blocking roads, protesting GMO infiltration and land grabs by big ag corporations. See, these sanctions against Russia have backflashed onto Europe. And those farmers who are being hit by the food export sanctions aren't able to make the money to make their payments. A lot of them are being driven out of business. They're losing farms that have been in their family for generations, and they're being snapped up by these giant multinational agricultural corporations. Turn them into GMO seed farms. And they're resenting that. All right, let's see what else is going on here. Over the weekend, something very bizarre happened. Over at the White House petition website, somebody had put up a petition late last week. Okay, and the petition was calling for the prohibition of any laws requiring mandatory vaccines. And the signatures were piling on. And then all of a sudden, middle of the day Friday, the numbers froze. Stuck at 56,791. And it has not changed since. And people are reporting to Natural News, who's covering this. They're going in and they're signing the petition, and the numbers will not change. They don't want it going over that 100,000 mark where the White House, by its own statement, is obliged to respond to it. So the White House is rigging their own website because we can't offend the big pharmaceutical corporations. They write really big, generous campaign donation checks. Apparently more information coming out about Jimmy Savile and his sexual predations at NHS hospitals for a half a century. Apparently he abused 63 people connected to Stoke Mandeville Hospital. Apparently it was an open secret. That's what he was doing there. But the one formal complaint made was ignored. He's too important. He's too visible. He's a celebrity. Celebrities are allowed to do things like this here. This is getting a little absurd over at Matrix, Bob. Apparently, defenders of the Catholic Church clergy are now trying to come up with studies that prove that the reason for priestly sexual molestation of children is all the fault of feminists and celibacy, and I would concede that second one. And apparently they're taking the position that priests having sex with boys 13 years of age or older is technically not pedophilia, since that is currently the age of consent. The Vatican considers anybody over the age of 13 as an adult capable of saying, yes, you may have sex with me. Just amazing stuff here. Norway's top Catholic accused in a fraud case. Apparently the Norwegian police raided the premises of the Catholic Church Thursday. Apparently there is taxpayer support for churches based on their membership. And apparently this top Catholic bishop in Norway was illegally listing immigrants as members of his church, even though they never actually showed up. Now, as you know, last week, Leonard Nimoy of Mr. Spock fame, a very nice gentleman, passed away. Age 83, he had a good life. And apparently, for some bizarre reason, the Westboro Baptist Church wanted to have a protest at his funeral. I can't even imagine why. But they wanted the press. We're going to protest at Leonard Nimoy. And apparently the Trekkies were already out in force to protect Mr. Spock from the Westboro Baptist Church. But it's been foiled because apparently the arrangements for the funeral have been kept secret. Nobody knows where it's going to take place. And so the Westboro Baptist Church has sort of had to cancel their plan to protest Leonard Nimoy. I can't even figure out why they would want to. You know, he's a movie star, very well-known movie star, TV star. His personal life, as little as I knew him, which wasn't much, but I did get to meet and work with him a couple of times. Very nice guy. Why would you protest? Why would you make a media circus out of this guy's funeral, other than to have a media circus and get some ink for your name, which is terrible. Alrighty, couple of quick stories. Apparently, the world of science is starting to doubt the theory of the Big Bang. They're only a few years late after WhatReallyHappened.com. CBC is reporting black hole breaks record, swallows up scientific theory. And basically a new supermassive black hole has been discovered, so massive that it undermines the theory of how much time this black hole had to be in existence after the Big Bang. To be this big, it had to have been far older. Another story out of Washington's CBS affiliate, universe may have had no beginning at all. There's been a slight revision to the theory of quantum mechanics, which steadies out all the epicycles. You can throw them all away, and goes back to the steady state theory. I'm feeling a little smug about that one. This one is really cool. This is over an Investment Watch blog, a couple of other places. Apparently scientists have designed a theoretical life form based on methane rather than water. And based on this, say that it's entirely possible there is life on Saturn's moon, Titan. I think we ought to take some of this money that we're spending on bombs and go back to Titan and find out. And by the way, NASA is still saying methane proves Mars may have once had life. They still don't have the courage to cross that line. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I got to go over and do Jim Goddard's show, and we'll be back here tomorrow on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay skeptical, stay informed. Please support Genesis. Please support WhatReallyHappened.com. We don't have Bill O'Reilly's paychecks to live on. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.